My name is Marguerite Ahearne. I was president from 1980-81. I was the first woman to be president of the Students' Union. I think women had stood for the presidency before I did. I was the first one to get it, and I suppose I really didn't see it so much as a strange thing. I just assumed it was ridiculous that there hadn't been women before and that there would be, women would follow me. And I was very surprised afterwards that there were so few women who became president. Women had had the other officerships before me as well and did afterwards, but very few women seem to have gone for the presidency even since. So that surprised me, I suppose. I just thought, it was the logical thing to happen. Most of the big campaigns at that time were around student finance. And there were fees at the time which look ridiculously small now, but they were hard to get together. And also, I myself came from a working class background, and I was very conscious of the fact that it was very difficult to get into UCD. I hadn't been able to get a grant myself because my father had actually worked overtime the year before I applied, and that had deemed me being unable to get a grant for college. So I'd worked for 2 years before I came to college to actually pay my way through, and that's how I got here. I got involved in my final year in the occupation. I remember we occupied, I think, 3 different places: the library, the administration building, and the telephone exchange. And I think the telephone exchange was the one that college really didn't like, because we were answering phones saying the telephone exchange was being occupied by the students. So there was a number of us that were called to a disciplinary committee over it, and we boycotted the first one. And I remember the Students' Union officers were very worried because they'd managed to get in touch with everybody, but it was over a bank holiday weekend the letters were delivered. And of course I was down where I came from in Wexford. The letter was delivered to my flat in Dublin, so they were all terrified that I wouldn't, that I'd go straight in. But I had come to the union offices to check it out, to see what we should do. So we boycotted the first one, and they then sent us a very kind of draconian letter. So we had to go to the second one, but we had legal advice at the time. And in the end, they fined us all, I think. Some people gave in and they had lesser fines, but the ones that had dragged the process out, and at one stage they threatened us that we wouldn't get, I was in my final year, so we thought we mightn't be able to sit our finals, which wasn't very pleasant. But we went to the High Court and we took an interlocutory injunction against the college authorities for breaking some of the rules of natural justice, and the fines were never paid. They disappeared. At that time we had a ridiculous situation that contraception was Charlie Haughey's law, that it was available for bona fide family planning purposes, was the actual quotation, and that meant that you had to go to a doctor and get a prescription for a condom, which was absolutely ludicrous. So we would always sell them out of the Student Union offices, or give them if people needed them. The welfare officer would do it, but I would do it myself as well, because my welfare officer wasn't always there in the evenings. We did actually go out to the concourse and try and get ourselves arrested, myself and himself, because we were both graduates as officers. And we thought, yeah, that doesn't matter, they can't do anything to us now. So we did go out and try and get arrested, but they showed no interest at all in arresting us. But for me, the very sad part of it was that we would get staff members, people like the porters, coming to the Student Union offices because they would have to pay for a doctor, which was, a ridiculous thing, really, when you think about it. I always felt very strongly, and I still do, on discrimination against people because of their sexuality. And we would have had a situation where the college wouldn't fund a gay sock at that time at all. There was all sorts of stuff going on in some of the other colleges around issues as well. So I would have tried, I wrote an article on the Hirschfield Centre at the time, which was in town, which was brilliant for gay people. It was one of the very few places in Dublin that you could go if you were gay, that you had any kind of a kind of a refuge, I suppose. And did try and get a gay sock going. People used to come and meet in my office in the president's office one night a week, and I would keep trying to leave it because I myself wasn't gay, but they would say like, oh, hang on, and let's see if we can get it going. But it was a dreadful time for gay people in Ireland then. It really was. I mean, the law was still there, particularly for guys, that it was a criminal offence. So, you know, we've come an awfully long way since then. I just hope we come that last bit now and give them their rights and they can get married. Among the student union group, I suppose most of them, I think, would have been in favour of gay rights at that time. But it wasn't the issue that everyone went for straight away. It wasn't an issue that a lot of people wanted to talk about, I think, you know. But certainly the general body of students, you know, it was the time of anti-gay jokes, really, you know. Wouldn't have been widespread, no. The H block issue was a very, I suppose, divisive issue in the union at the time. There was a referendum and the students had rejected support for H block. But there was a whole range of views, I think, you know. It was very difficult for us, I suppose, even as young people, to think of somebody dying on another part of the island, you know, whether you agreed with them or not. There was that huge emotion around it. And I do remember at one stage we got a letter written on a cigarette paper from H block, and because our Students' Union newspaper at the time didn't necessarily reflect the policies of the union, as editor I decided that the students should see it. It was written to them, so I reproduced the text of it, but I also reproduced the replica of the cigarette paper, and that wasn't entirely popular at that point in time. But I think, you know, it was very hard, because I think in that era, as opposed to even students' unions, people were trying to find a way, I suppose, to express nationalism without necessarily expressing support for the actions of the Provisional IRA. So that, and then there was the whole kind of prisoners' rights thing that came into it as well. So it was a very difficult era, yeah. It was tough. Capitation was a big issue because we were trying to find a way to fund the union, which, you know, the union never had a kind of a steady level of funding, because clubs and societies were funded separately and the bar was keeping its own profits and everything else. So we really did need a kind of a basis, but that went to referendum and we lost it. One of the other issues I was very pleased about that happened in my own year was that the library staff went on strike, and we managed to get a general meeting of the Students' Union supporting the library staff, which was at the time coming up to exams, and so that was really nice that we managed to persuade the students, again, because the authorities at college at that time would have seen it as something that we would definitely be against it, and we weren't. There was a plethora of different things going on, and at the same time, you knew that within college, if you wanted to try and do anything, your only hope was to act as a lobbyist and to try and, you know, get any kind of support. It was very difficult to get things on the agenda of the governing body because you were a sole person and you were relying on some of the more progressive academics that might second a motion for you or whatever. And also at that time, one of the issues we had was the architectural school, which didn't want to move out of Earlsford Terrace. They were being forced to move, and that was, again, something we got very involved and worked closely with the academic staff. There was a constitutional review body in USI because you had the other colleges of higher education and that, and they were trying to change all the representation of USI at that time. So that was interesting, and we were also trying to get USI to not to be part of IUS, which was the International Union of Students, which was a kind of a Eastern European-based organisation. So the IUS was, as far as I know at that time, was very much a Marxist, you know, a communist, I suppose, type of organisation. And at that time, USI wanted to keep the affiliation, and they was great shenanigans went on at various conferences and types of votes, and 2/3 in favour or 2/3 entitled to vote in favour and everything else. But eventually, I mean, most of the universities wanted that disaffiliation at that time from the IUS. Hard to know, I suppose, really, in a sense. The college, once you were working with them, once I was a sabbatical officer, you had to work with them. And you had to kind of, relationships were fine actually at that stage. I could meet with the people who were sitting on the disciplinary committee 2 years before threatening to throw me out of college, and we could have a decent relationship because you had to. It was your job and you had to get on with it. But I suppose students were, it's hard to know that there was a certain amount of radical student base there, I suppose. But in general, you still have the students that you will always have who wanted to go from the library to the restaurant, to the lecture, to the library, to the restaurant. And they were the majority, I'm sure. There was I think that's been the case ever since student unions started, To be honest, I don't know enough about the movement in the last 10 years. I kind of keep a half an eye to things and Google it every now and again. I think there was always the group of students who cared, and not only cared about what happened in college, but cared about the people who couldn't get here. And I think that was always there. And I think there will always be, I think it's part of being young is that human rights matter to you, and that, people often say it's an idealism of youth, but I actually think it's something really important that, you try and preserve in your life that belief in equality, that belief in fairness for people. So, I think it's always been there, and I think it always will be there. I'd like to think it always will be there. My time in the union was probably, it was the best of time that I was involved here. As I say, I was finance officer and then I was student union president, and as finance officer I would have been on the executive. And my lifelong friends that I have from college are my friends from the students union. Officers who predated me, officers who came after me. We were all friends, and we're still friends, and we still meet up.